Section 1 Taking the Reins of Government. America's bicentennial, which culminated on July 4, 1976, was a spirited and unifying celebration of our country, its founding, and its ideals. As we approach our nation's 250th anniversary, which will take place during the next presidency, America is now divided between two opposing forces: woke revolutionaries and those who believe in the ideals of the American Revolution. The former believe that America is, and always has been, systemically racist and that it is not worth celebrating and must be fundamentally transformed, largely through a centralized administrative state. The latter believe in America's history and heroes, its principles and promise, and in everyday Americans and the American way of life. They believe in the Constitution and Republican government. Conservatives, the Americanists in this battle, must fight for the soul of America, which is very much at stake. Just 2 years after the death of the last surviving Constitutional Convention delegate, James Madison, Abraham Lincoln warned that the greatest threat to America would come not from without, but from within. This is evident today, whether it be mask and vaccine mandates, school and business closures, efforts to keep Americans from driving gas cars or using gas stoves, or efforts to defund the police, indoctrinate school children, alter beloved books, abridge free speech, undermine the colorblind ideal, or deny the biological reality that there are only two sexes. The left's steady stream of insanity appears to be never-ending. The next administration must stand up for American ideals, American families, and American culture, all things in which, thankfully, most Americans still believe. Highlighting this need, former director of the Office of Management and Budget Russ Vought writes in Chapter 2, "The modern conservative president's task is to 20. Mandate for leadership, the conservative promise limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. At the core of this goal is the work of the White House and the central personnel agencies." Article 2 of the Constitution vests all federal executive power in a president, made accountable to the citizenry through regular elections. Our founders wrote, "The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America." Accordingly, Vought writes, "It is the President's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies, not their own." Yet the federal bureaucracy has a mind of its own. Federal employees are often ideologically aligned, not with the majority of the American people, but with one another, posing a profound problem for Republican government, a government of, by, and for the people. As Donald Devine, Dennis Kirk, and Paul Don write in Chapter 3, an autonomous bureaucracy has neither independent constitutional status nor separate moral legitimacy. Byzantine personnel rules provide the bureaucrats with their chief means of self-protection. What's more, knowledge of such rules is used to thwart the president's appointees and agenda. As Devine, Kirk, and Don write, "Managing the immense bureaucracy of the federal government is impossible without an understanding of the key central personnel agencies and their governing laws and regulations. Many of these laws and regulations governing a largely underworked, overcompensated, and unaccountable federal civilian workforce are so irrational that they would be comical in a less important context. This is true whether it comes to evaluating employees' performance or hiring new employees. Only in the federal government could an applicant in the hiring process be sent to the front of the line because of a history of drug addiction or alcoholism, or due to morbid obesity, irritable bowel syndrome, or a psychiatric disorder. The next administration should insist that the federal government's hiring, evaluation, retention, and compensation practices benefit taxpayers, rather than benefiting the lowest rung of the federal workforce. In order to carry out the president's desires, political appointees must be given the tools, knowledge, and support to overcome the federal government's obstructionist human resources departments. More fundamentally, the new administration must fill its ranks with political appointees. Devine, Kirk, and Don observed that the Trump administration appointed fewer political appointees in its first few months in office than any other recent presidency. This left career employees in charge in many places. This can occur even after departments have been fully staffed with political appointees. Vought writes that the White House Office of Management and Budget, OMB, should establish a reputation as the keeper of commander's intent. Yet OMB is dominated by career employees who often try to overrule political appointees serving in the various executive departments. Empowering political appointees across the administration is crucial to a president's success. 21. Section 1. Taking the reins of government. Above all, the president and those who serve under him or her must be committed to the Constitution and the rule of law. This is particularly true of a conservative administration, which knows that the president is there to uphold the Constitution, not the other way around. If a conservative administration does not respect the Constitution, no administration will. In Chapter 1, former Deputy Chief of Staff to the President Rick Dearborn writes that the White House counsel must take seriously the duty to protect the powers and privileges of the President from encroachments by Congress, the judiciary, and the administrative components of departments and agencies. Equally important, the President must enforce the Constitution and laws as written, rather than proclaiming new law unilaterally. Presidents should not issue mask or vaccine mandates, arbitrarily transfer student loan debt, or issue monarchical mandates of any sort. Legislatures make the laws in a republic, not executives. It is crucial that all three branches of the federal government respect what Madison called the double security to our liberties, the separation of powers among the three branches, and the separation of powers between the federal government and the states. This double security has been greatly compromised over the years. Vaught writes that the modern executive branch writes federal policy, enforces that policy, and often adjudicates whether that policy was properly drafted and enforced. He describes this as constitutionally dire and in urgent need of repair, adding, nothing less than the survival of self-governance in America is at stake. When it comes to ensuring that freedom can flourish, nothing is more important than deconstructing the centralized administrative state. Political appointees who are answerable to the President and have decision-making authority in the executive branch are key to this essential task. The next administration must not cede such authority to nonpartisan experts, who pursue their own ends while engaging in groupthink, insulated from American voters. The following chapters detail how the next administration can be responsive to the American people, not to entrenched elites, how it can take care that all the laws are faithfully executed, not merely those that the President desires to see executed, and how it can achieve results and not be stymied by an unelected bureaucracy. 38. Mandate for leadership, the conservative promise, either NSC or DPC, healthcare, energy, and environment, either NEC or DPC, and trade and international economic policy, either NSC or NEC. Identifying these potentially problematic areas and assigning policy responsibilities to only one council where possible will help to speed up the policy coordination process. While other chapters will cover specific policy goals for each department or agency, incoming policy councils will need to move rapidly to lead policy processes around cross-cutting agency topics, including countering China, enforcing immigration laws, reversing regulatory policies in order to promote energy production, combating the left's aggressive attacks on life and religious liberty, and confronting wokeism throughout the federal government. National Security Council. The NSC is intended to be an interdepartmental body within the White House that can set national security policy with a whole-of-government approach. Unlike the other policy councils, the NSC was established by statute. 8 statutory members and advisors who are currently part of the NSC include the President and Vice President, the Secretaries of State, Defense, and Energy, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Director of National Intelligence. 9. The NSC staff, and particularly the National Security Advisor, should be vetted for foreign and security policy experience and insight. The National Security Advisor and NSC staff advise the President on matters of foreign policy and national security, serve as an information conduit in times of crisis, and as liaisons ensuring that written communications are properly shared among NSC members. Special attention should be given to the use of detailees to staff the NSC. In recent years, the NSC's staff size has been right-sized from its peak of 400 in 2015 down to 100-150 professional members. The next administration should try to limit the number of detailees to ensure more direct presidential control. National Economic Council. The NEC was established in 1993 by executive order and has 4 key functions. L. To coordinate the economic policy making process with respect to domestic and international economic issues. L. To coordinate economic policy advice to the President. L. To ensure that policy decisions and programs are consistent with the President's stated goals and that those goals are being effectively pursued. L. To monitor implementation of the President's economic policy agenda. 10. The NEC Director coordinates and implements the President's economic policy objectives by working with Cabinet Secretaries, their departments, and multiple. 39. White House office agencies. The Director is supported by a staff of policy experts in various fields, including infrastructure, manufacturing, research and development, agriculture, small business, financial regulation, housing, technology and innovation, and fiscal policy. The NEC considers economic policy matters, and the DPC typically considers anything related to domestic matters with the exception of economic policy matters. It also differs from the Council of Economic Advisors, C. Whereas the NEC is in charge of policy development, the C acts as the White House's internal research arm for economic analysis. It is therefore critically important to find people with the right qualifications to head both the NEC and the C. The C is almost always led by a well-known academic economist, and the NEC is regularly led by someone with expertise in directing the president's economic policy process. Those who have served in the role have ranged from former CEOs of the nation's largest investment firms to financial services industry managers to seasoned congressional staffers who have managed the economic policy issues for top financial and tax writing committees. Domestic Policy Council. The Domestic Policy Council, DPC, consists of advisors to the President on non-economic domestic policy issues as well as international issues with a significant domestic component, such as immigration. It is one of the primary policy councils serving the President along with the NSC and NEC. The Director serves as the principal DPC advisor to the President, along with members of the Cabinet. And the Deputy Director chairs the committee responsible for coordinating domestic policy development at the Deputy Secretary level. In this respect, both the Director and the Deputy Director have critical institutional functions that affect the development of domestic policy throughout the administration. The DPC also has policy experts, for example, special assistants to the President or SAPs, who are responsible for developing and coordinating, as well as for advising the President, on specific issues. It is essential that DPC policy expertise reflect the most prominent issues that are before the administration, issues such as the environment, healthcare, housing, and immigration. In addition, DPC SAPs should demonstrate a working knowledge of the rulemaking process, although they need not necessarily be experts on regulation. Because a working knowledge of the rulemaking process will facilitate the DPC's effectiveness in coordinating administration policy. The DPC also needs to work closely with other offices within the Executive Office of the President to promote economic opportunity and private sector innovation. This includes working with the Office of Management and Budget and its Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs as well as the Council of Economic Advisors, Council on Environmental Quality, and Office of Science and Technology. 40. Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise Policy. To this end, the Director should chair a standing meeting with the principals from each of the other EOP offices to enhance coordination from within the White House. Several areas will be especially important as the DPC works to develop a well-defined domestic policy agenda. One is the promotion of innovation as a foundation for economic growth and opportunity. The President should establish an economic opportunity working group, chaired by the DPC Director, to coordinate the development of policies that promote economic opportunity. Another important area is the promotion of healthcare reform to bring down costs for the American people and the pressure that spending on health programs puts on the federal budget. Finally, DPC should coordinate with the NSC on a policy agenda to enhance border security. Office of the Vice President, OVP. In modern U.S. history, the Vice President has acted as a significant advisor to the President. Once elected, the VP helps to promote and, in many instances, put into place and execute the President's agenda. The President may additionally determine the inclusion of OVP staff in White House meetings, including Policy Coordinating Committee, Deputies Committee, and Principals Committee discussions as has been done in various recent administrations. Recent presidents have decided to give Vice Presidents space in the West Wing. The VP's proximity to the President, as well as to the Chief of Staff and additional senior advisors, makes his or her role a powerful one within the West Wing. Presidents typically tap VPs to lead various administration efforts. These efforts have included serving on the NSC Principals Committee, heading the National Space Council, addressing immigration and border issues, leading the response to healthcare crises, and supervising workforce programs. VPs traditionally also spearhead projects of personal interest that have been authorized by the President. The VP is also charged with breaking tie votes in the Senate and in recent years has served abroad as a brand ambassador for the White House and more broadly the United States, announcing administration priorities and coordinating with heads of state and other top foreign government officials. The Vice President, as President of the Senate, could be a President's emissary to the Senate. Office of the First Lady. First Gentleman. The First Lady or First Gentleman plays an interesting role in the formation, implementation, and execution of policy in concert with the President. Active and interested first spouses often champion a select number of signature issues, whether they be thorny social issues or deeper policy issues. One advantage of the first spouse's taking on hot button social issues is that any political backlash will be less severe than it would be for the President. 41. White House Office. The first spouse normally appoints a chief of staff who has enough assistants to support the spouse's activities. In the East Wing of the White House, this group works exclusively with the first spouse and senior members of the White House along with EOP personnel to implement and execute the first spouse's priorities, which reflect the first spouse's passions and interests and are often identified as important in discussions with the President. Executed well, they can be strategically useful in accelerating the administration's agenda. Past East Wing initiatives have focused on such issues as combating bullying, fighting drug abuse, promoting literacy, and encouraging physical education for young adults and children. The first spouse is afforded significant resources. His or her staff also works with the President's policy team, members of the cabinet, and other EOP staff.